Okay, everybody's filtering in. This is the exciting part. There's a ramp up. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited to be here with Ashley Quamme. I know some of you on the call are familiar with Ashley. For those of you who are not, Ashley consults to our practice. So she owns a firm called Beyond the Plan. So her background is in therapy and more specifically thinking about money and emotions, so financial therapy. So she works with us as a financial behavior specialist. And so she does some work behind the scenes, consulting us, so the team that serves you. So we are made better. We are better people because we know Ashley and we learn from her. And so she case consults with us and helps us become better in the area of our world called behavioral finance. So thinking about that intersection between money and emotions. And I met Ashley a few years ago at a conference, and I thought this is absolutely incredible that we have these resources in our industry. And we locked her down to consult with our practice. And she's also available to clients to meet with. And I originally thought, okay, sometimes there's some clients that may need some Ashley support. And now I'm a firm believer that everybody needs Ashley in their lives because, everybody comes with a different money story or ideas about money in their heads and why you make the decisions you do. So that's why our interactions together aren't just based on me sending you a spreadsheet and us making a quick math decision. There are different priorities and decision points that happen. And the one we're talking about today is early retirement. And so that is a big reason that very often we have clients that will sit down with Ashley and just sort out the emotions of that around that decision. So when I say those words to somebody about you're in work optional territory or you can retire early, that's something that sometimes just takes some time for that information to wash over you and for that to hit and to process through what that might mean. So today it's going to be a little bit of a blend between the nerdy math financial planning piece of it, and then Ashley and I are going to kind of get into some of the emotional factors of retiring. Now, this presentation is really, we talked about early retirement, but this is really retirement at any point. There's the same kind of issues or considerations. There's a couple things that are early retirement oriented from a financial planning perspective, but really the identity shift and that change and making that decision, all of that can be really at any time that happens. So thanks for being here. So I'm going to share my screen. I've got a couple of slides to hit some of the nerdy stuff first, and then Ashley are going to get to talking. And feel free just from if you'd like to ask any questions, I will also have the Q&A up and happy to take questions along the way that you may have. So retirement doesn't have to be all or nothing. So that's what we thought that was a great title to really think about. Generationally, retirement looks very different to many of our clients. It's not a situation where you work at the same job for 45 years and get a gold watch and walk out the door and you're done. We find that many clients see that looking a little bit differently. And so that could mean maybe working a higher stress, higher paying job for a period of time. And we hit a burnout wall, or maybe there's a transition to more meaningful work or something you'd really like to pursue. We've had clients transition completely. So shifting from being an attorney to being a therapist or working in a completely different field. I had a client who once said that they wanted to go work for an airline so that they could receive free flights and travel perks. And they just said, you know what? After working in corporate America my whole life, I kind of want to yell at people in customer service. And so just having that kind of interaction was interesting to them. We've had clients go pour wine at a winery or start a small business. We have a lot of clients that consult back to their current industry or approach their current employer and just say, hey, is there some way for me to stay in a capacity that makes sense for me? So these are the things I love about my job. I love XYZ. I never want to do these things again. So maybe I don't want to manage people anymore, but I want to go down to being an individual contributor. Or these are the clients or contracts or projects I want to work on, but I don't want to do all the other stuff. And I'm willing to work 2 days a week or 3 days a week or part days. And this is what I want to get paid. So very often our clients come to us who are very highly motivated, well educated, and able to and really a good asset and resources back to their company. So maybe you don't want to do this at the full capacity anymore, but you are an asset to your company. And so writing your ticket and basically saying, here's exactly what I want to do and for how long and how I want to do this. And is that possible? You might be really surprised by what that could potentially look like. So I want to explore a little bit around this today. So it may be more realistic than you think. It just really takes setting an appointment with us. So everybody on this call is a client, and we've built your financial plan or have access to a lot of your financial data. And it's really just mapping it out. What does it take to make this happen? What are those possible trade-offs? And so is this realistic? Is this something that we can do? So a lot of the times we want to get around the math of it and understand the trade-offs and priorities. And Ashley can be really helpful for that too, about, what are we willing to maybe trade off, or what are those trade-offs and what does that look like to make that retirement sprint happen, make that happen earlier. I've got a few financial considerations to think about now about positioning your assets or loading certain accounts. If you're thinking about retiring early, there are some age-based considerations with accessing money. So we want to just make sure that if this is on your mind and we're ahead of those particular ages, we might want to start to think about kind of pulling back from certain types of contributions and contributing to different accounts, depending on your retirement timeline. So talk about that in a moment. Tax planning opportunity. So I promise I won't bore you too much with it, but there's this huge valley of opportunity in early retirement to do some tax planning. So we want to think about that as well. And then we're going to come over to Ashley and I are going to have a conversation around really the emotional side of the retirement, because very often it's hard to decide, do I want to, do I not want to, until we get secure with the numbers. So a lot of times in financial planning, I like to start with the more emotional aspect and then kind of get to some of the numbers. But in early retirement, often it is comforting to just say, yep, this is possible. Now let's think about whether you feel ready. Because when I ask you, are you ready to retire? There's two ways to think about that. So, Ashley, if I asked you, are you ready to retire? Are you thinking math? Are you thinking emotions?
I would, well, maybe this is a little unfair to ask me. I know my answer would be more on the emotional side. I can tell you, Clayton, my husband, would be purely on the numbers side. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I would think emotional.
Yeah. So, and that's to each person on this call too. When I ask, are you ready to retire? What are you actually thinking I'm asking you? Because that can go a few different ways. And so, are you ready financially? Are you ready emotionally? Are there other things that need to be done? We have a client, absolutely love her, and she feels like she needs to complete her life's work. And so her job, she feels like she's not ready. It's not about how her money looks or how her body feels or mentally. It's really saying, I have this purpose tied to when I feel ready to retire and step into that. I did have somebody tell me way back. So when I started in my career, I ventured out to retirement plan education meetings. So it helped enroll and educate people who are part of a 401k plan. So, Ashley, I had somebody who came into me one day. She signed up for a one-on-one meeting with me. She came in and said, I'm going to retire next month. And I said, oh, that's great. Like, how did you determine that? Is it a birthday or a milestone? And she said, your body tells you when it's time to retire.
Oh,
So,
I do love that.
so it was great. We had to think about some of the math and the logistics and, get that part of it done. But she just said her body told her it was time to be done. So that are you ready can be answered a few different ways. And so we want to think about all of those considerations on the call today and also just share some of those resources. I meet with all of you as clients in different ways and we answer different questions and talk about different things. And we don't always have the time to just spend an hour to explore this topic. So glad you're here today. And certainly if there's anything that you specifically want to make sure we hit or address or slow down on, I'm happy to do that as well. So we already kind of talked about this, where it's a lot less likely of this abrupt stop. I find that many more of my clients are thinking about these phases of really, what do I want to be doing now for this period of time? And then what might I want to do next? And that might look a little bit different. And so phasing out of high stress work, and sometimes it's just mentally you need this phase out time. So Ashley, when I tell somebody who is that they're financially ready to retire, do you kind of have a sense of like how long does it usually take people to mentally wrap their brains around it and take action? Do you have like any sense of that?
Yeah, I think So I don't have like research data, but I do have experiential knowledge, and I would say it can take a few years for some people, just but depending upon where they are. But I would say, ballpark here, we're looking at it, definitely more than 12 months, sometimes to,
Yeah. Yeah, Ashley, I think you froze for a second, but I've got
oh,
you.
sorry.
Yeah, so it takes some time and also, just kind of picturing what you're retiring to. If you're kind of every day working on what's in front of you and you're busy with life, and if you still have kids activities and different things happening around you, that can play a big role in kind of what happens next. So the other thing is for a lot of our clients, especially in tech professionals, it's sometimes even just the consideration around, can I keep working? Indefinitely. So, your financial plan, or you might originally say, I want to retire at a certain point at 60 or 62 or 65 or 70 or never retire. But sometimes there are shifts in the industry. There are layoffs, there are layoff opportunities to take. There are some considerations along those lines too. So sometimes if you feel that you're considering retiring earlier, I always like to have a plan around that earliest date to just say, okay, let's figure out when you are in work optional territory. I like to use that word work optional, where I don't have to show up every day and I don't have to work at the same level. Or we can scale that back and say, okay, whatever your earnings are right now, can you step back from that so that if you did face a job change or if you just burn right out, that you can say, I don't have to work at this level any longer. So we can build those types of plans. That's all individualized. And so it's just really thinking about, plan A could be staying at your current job until a certain point of time. Plan B can be going part-time or consulting or taking a gap or sabbatical. We can have plan C, plan D, plan E. We can build these different plans. So there's just different ways to imagine that. And so I love sitting down and really just brainstorming and thinking through what are all those possibilities. And one thing I wanted to mention here is to just start to talk to and think about other people that are maybe in this position. So sometimes our models of retirees, if that's maybe the generation above you, that might have looked different. And so I've had a client before tell me they were ready to retire in their mid 50s. So Ashley, this person said to me, well, I know I can retire, but my parents never had the opportunity to retire early, and I don't know what this says about me. And I don't know how
Yeah.
they're going to look at me because they worked really hard until they were 65 or whatever it was. And, even though I'm financially secure to do this, I just like there's a perception around what early retirement looks like or means. Or like, what if they think that I'm like money bags over here, like just because I'm financially secure? So do you ever see that?
Oh yeah, that fear is especially when we're looking to the generation above, right? Yeah, what will it say about me? What will the perception be? Or amongst peers, too, or family members, siblings. Like, what will it say about me if I do this, even though I really, really want to, and it would be good for me, or I just can.
Yeah, yeah. So it's figuring out who are your models. And so sometimes that is somebody who has maybe gone part-time in your organization or has consulted back to your organization. Think about friends or neighbors or people who either have talked about retiring early or retiring in general and thinking about what they're doing and what they're thinking. So I don't think there's enough open conversation around this. I talk about money all day, every day, so I talk more openly than maybe most about this sort of topic, but I would just maybe urge you to think about having retirement mentors to think through or talk through, or just share those thoughts and feelings with us. Ashley and I are talking to people every single day about money and emotion, and we're a safe place to talk to about thinking through these different dynamics or feelings that come up with this idea of retiring differently than maybe some of those prior models or what's normal. And you just might be surprised at what's possible. So I just want to kind of put that out there. You know, does it have to be all or nothing? Does it have to be later on. I had a client who had told me, well, I was told you have to retire, you're supposed to retire at 65 because that's when you get Medicare. And as soon as I came up with a different alternative healthcare plan for her, she put in her notice the very next day and she retired at 60. So it's just sometimes we get this idea in our head of this age that we're supposed to be to retire or this dollar amount we're supposed to have in the account. And especially when that is a kind of a rounded age, like fives or tens, or if it's a rounded dollar amount, like, well, I need to have $5 million or I need to have a certain dollar amount. Sometimes I kind of question that a little bit to say, let's run that against your particular expenses and information. I have one client who always will say to me, well, I don't have that dollar amount. Like I have friends that have this dollar amount and they're retired because they have that dollar amount, but I don't have that dollar amount. It's like, you don't spend the same way that they do. It's all relative to your expenses and your lifestyle. And that's why every single thing in financial planning is custom tailored. So even if I have 100 different sets of clients with the same data, same spreadsheet data, I'm going to build 100 different financial plans because we all make different decisions about how we travel and our home and our lifestyle and our hobbies and our vehicles and if we're gifting money to kids or not, or all of those different decisions come together and all the smaller ones too. And that's different person to person. So that's why kind of getting a little bit more clear on that. So if it's been a little while since you have thought about that, then it's time to maybe explore a little bit about what retirement lifestyle might look like, explore your expenses, all of that. So I wanted to bring up one slide for those of you, most of you have Right Capital financial plans where I can build income tiles for different phases of life. So for some of my clients with kids, for example, they might line it up to, okay, my kids are in, this phase of life, like they're in high school, then they're in college, and then they're launched, right? Or it's based on my ages, right? So I'm 40 to 45 or 46 to 50, whatever it might be. Or it could be, I have clients that have every year has a tile. So here's my income expectation for 2026, 27, 28, 29. We can build an infinite number of tiles. So that's why the straight line financial planning calculators just don't work because if I plug in my salary today with just a normal nominal increase and then I retire at a certain date, it could work fine. Most of our lives don't look that way, both with the income inflows, they vary, and the outflows, our expenses and our goals and how we spend money is very different year to year. So we can build different tiles and imagine different ideas. So this is something where we can build and turn them on and off or give different dollar amounts to certain tiles. So just gave kind of an example of what that might look like. All right, I'm gonna hit a couple nerdy things, and then we're gonna get into some of the conversation with Ashley here. So some things to maybe act on now. So one thing I just want to mention is that, cash is king. Liquidity is important. One thing I think of as a mistake that people make when they want to retire early is putting all of their money in illiquid assets. And what I mean by that is sometimes it's a focus on paying off the house. If I'm going to retire at 53, for example, and I want the house paid off, well, now I've got all this money locked up in equity in my home. Also, if you're just maxing out a pre-tax 401k plan that you don't have access to, sometimes that doesn't leave you enough money to live on and financial flexibility to live on in the meantime. So very often, if that's the case, if you share with us, I want to retire early, or I want to retire at this time period before I can access certain assets, then maybe having some money in different buckets of accounts, that makes sense. So keeping a good emergency fund, of course, that's good no matter what the situation is, but also maybe scaling back a little bit on some 401k contributions or extra mortgage payments or into anything else that's illiquid if you happen to have maybe an annuity or pension product that you're paying into or something like that, something that has less liquidity. We might want to kind of eliminate that. Same thing with the types of investments you hold. So if you're buying any private equity or private debt investments or alternatives or hedge funds, whatever it is, if there's anything separately you're doing that feels less liquid, or CDs at the bank, anything like that, we want to think about access to money. There's a premium on that. So thinking about what can we actually spend and access and touch at that particular point. So for a lot of our retirement assets, they're accessible to us at age 59 and a half. I don't know why the IRS like to half age there, but we are at a half age there, 59 and a half. There are some ways to get access to it earlier. I mentioned two of them on my second to last bullet point here. So age 55, there's some way to get access to some of it. And there's a rule called 72T where you can spread out distributions over a specific distribution rule. If we need to, we can touch some of your pre-tax money using one of those two rules if they pertain to you. So just want to mention those so that we actually have articles on our blog, on our website, on each of those different areas. So if you feel like I want to retire at 55 or later, and I want access to my 401k specifically, Rule of 55 might be something we want to talk about further. So maybe jot that down as, hey, I want to chat with Emily about this. Or 72T is just a way to say, if I take money out of an IRA, it's called equal substantial payment. So there's a certain payment schedule you have to keep up until age 59 and a half. But if you start it early and take distributions until that 59 and a half, you will satisfy this schedule that they want you to take the money out. So there's a couple ways we can access it. But generally, building up some money in brokerage accounts, taxable brokerage accounts, that can be useful. The other thing that a lot of people don't realize is you can have access to Roth IRA contributions. So money that you've put into Roth account can be accessible to you early, just the contribution piece of it. It's the growth or earnings piece that can be taxed or penalized depending on your age. And then, so sometimes using some of those investment vehicles can make more sense in your case too. So I like to think about what's the earliest point you want to retire, what age will you be, and how much money do we need in each of those years, and making sure we're allocating enough so that we're not showing up to an early retirement date with all of our money kind of locked into these boxes that we require extra taxes to get that money out, or penalties or fees or anything like that. My goal is to save that for you. Another goal is to have a budgeting exercise. One thing that drives me crazy is these retirement calculators that are out there, like just the straight line calculators on Fidelity, Empower, AARP, they're all the same in the way that they assume you're going to spend less money in retirement. So Ashley, when somebody retires, let's say at 55 years old, are they magically going to start spending a lot less money at 56? What do you think?
No, generally
Oh,
not.
maybe more, right? So
Maybe more.
likely more. So
At least the same.
yeah, I've been doing this for almost 20 years. So my experience of this is, especially for early retirement, is that you retire and then there's an uptick in spending for a period of time. So there's a range of time period, this early retirement go-go year, they sometimes call it go-go years. And then it kind of tapers down a little bit. And then at the end of your financial plan, that ticks up. So we've got healthcare considerations and things like that. So it's more of a smile kind of pattern. And so we very often like to build in, and that's why straight line calculators just don't work, right? So what they assume is that you spend 20 to 30% less in those early retirement years. And that's just really not often, right? Because what are you doing with your time if you're not working 40, 50, 60, whatever hours a week that you're currently working? How are you filling that time? So are you filling that time with hobbies or going out to lunch or vacationing more or whatever it might be? There might be some additional costs. So a lot of our clients will, these delayed projects get done, or these trips happen, or that's when you're upsizing your home. Or even I have a client just talked to yesterday who's downsizing his home, but it's in a better location that's going to cost more. So less square footage, but it's an upsizing cost. And these are things that will kind of cost more in that early retirement time period, and that's okay. That's really what it's meant for. So we want to make sure that we're thinking about what might that life look like. So knowing the baseline spending, we want to keep that relatively similar and figure out where are those areas that it might actually go up a little bit. So are we replacing vehicles at different times, or taking special trips, or making different purchases, or renovating the home, whatever it might be? Those are things that we want to then pepper in. So we'll typically take people through a little bit of a budgeting exercise just to get more clear, especially if money's just kind of coming in and things feel comfortable. You might not know how money's flowing out. So the second line isn't, I'm not putting you on a budget. I actually don't like that word. It's really just thinking about what are the cash flows, just so we know what to project. Let's just know our numbers. And likely then we can then intentionally dial up the areas you want to spend more on. So there's a lot of opportunity there just to kind of do that review. So I'm happy to help with that process if that's something that's useful to you, to just get clear on what the outflows actually look like. kind of the next point, the third one down, is really about loading HSA or healthcare savings accounts. Because sometimes when people don't want to retire early, it's that fear of healthcare expenses are going to be insane. So if you have a big old bucket of money that is meant for healthcare expenses that's sitting right there ready to spend, sometimes that can make it a little bit easier. So we love if you can cash flow and cover your own healthcare expenses along the way and just save money away in a healthcare savings account if you're eligible to have one. So if you're in a high deductible healthcare plan and you have an HSA account available to you, you can save in it every single year and just load that up, invest it, let it grow. You can use that money the rest of your life for retirement healthcare expenses. Some of our clients save it all the way for long-term care expenses or much later on. But it can also just give you a little bit of peace to say, okay, if I have to come up with premiums for healthcare, then I have this money sitting there ready to go. There's also a whole, I could talk for an entire hour about healthcare planning and retirement, early retirement specifically. There's some strategy about keeping your income lower to qualify for subsidized healthcare. Those are things we can talk about. There's other ways to kind of get healthcare in retirement as well. So if that's something that you're concerned about, where you're saying, okay, I kind of feel ready, but I worry about healthcare, like if that's a consideration for you, please surface it to me. I'd love to talk to you about that specifically in your case and just quote the numbers. So I've had plenty of clients that once we solved that, like put the key in the lock and turned it, they're like, oh, okay, I think I can quit the corporate job that has a good healthcare benefit and become an entrepreneur and start my side business or consult, right? Or do something different that doesn't have healthcare or just retire. Something that doesn't have healthcare related to it, that can be a consideration. The fourth point really is just about capital gains rate. So unless your income is in the point where it puts you in the much higher capital gains rate, the 20% bracket, capital gains rate are likely 15% to you today or 15% to you tomorrow. Sometimes I think we think about tax rates as always being higher when you are working. But if your capital gains bracket, the 15% bracket is most people during most years. Sometimes it just makes sense to say, okay, if I'm coming up to this early retirement period and I need money to live on, in order to kind of support that time period, sometimes taking some of that risk off the table with a single individual stock or any concentrated position or selling a property or business, whatever it might be. This isn't blanket advice because it's just we'd have to look at your plan and see what your actual tax rates are, what the differences are, but sometimes it doesn't make sense to wait when it's capital gains taxation. So if it's selling a security that has growth on it or appreciation, we can just get that, maybe get some of that chipped away at or sold. So it secures more of that point one liquidity and flexibility. So getting some more money into that kind of bucket. And then the last thing is really just test driving retirement. So sometimes just seeing how it feels. So that could be either just taking actual sabbatical or taking a pause from work. It could be test driving kind of that spend level. So I think sometimes if you think you might be spending a lot more or less, just kind of seeing how that feels or seeing how that cash flow plan feels. But there are ways to kind of test drive and see how does that feel. I've had people text me from the beach and say, I'm already bored. I don't want to do this. And so, or go out for surgery and say, it wasn't as fun sitting on the couch as I thought it might be. So, it's just seeing how that might feel and nothing's permanent. You can always, you always have the right to change your mind about how that might feel. Okay, last slide, I promise. Then we're going to get into the Ashley fun stuff. So I have to talk about taxes and the tax opportunity that comes from early retirement. So in this case, this person's plan, their income tax rate. So these are the tax brackets down here at the bottom. These are the ages of the person. So this person in my example is 40 years old. And they're right now somewhere in like their effective tax rate is getting closer to that 30% line. So you can imagine this is when they're working, their income is higher, and then shoo, they retire. So this little valley of opportunity, now the effective tax rate hits almost 10% here. So it is a crime, a financial crime to waste this low dip window right here. Because really what you're saying is, in these cases, we don't want to choose to pay 30 here or choose to pay more than 30% taxes here when we have the opportunity to pay 10 or 12 or 20% here. So what we want to do is smooth out your tax plan a little bit here and say, I want to take some of this later income and I want to choose to pay the tax now up to a certain point. So we might fill up a 12% tax bracket or 22 or 24% bracket. We choose how much we pay in taxes during these valleys. So the effective way we're doing this is choosing to here defer some of our income down into this valley. So putting money into pre-tax vehicles or deferred compensation plans if you have those at work, just deferring that compensation and saying, I don't want to choose to pay 30%. I want to choose to pay a lower rate. I'm going to push that income into a later year at a lower bracket. Or I can bring it forward and say, instead of knowing that later in my 80s and 90s, I'm going to have these larger income tax rates, I want to choose to pay the taxes now. And that can be either just distributing the money or more likely, the big opportunity here is a Roth conversion. So Roth conversion is just choosing to pay the taxes and moving money over from your pre-tax bucket over to a Roth, paying the taxes at the time intentionally up to a certain amount so that later you have a big bucket of tax-free money that's distributed to you tax-free regardless of what the tax rates are. So if I looked at this, I think of, okay, how do I smooth this down and kind of fill in that valley a little bit and lower your overall lifetime taxes? The super cool thing that our tax planning software will do here is to calculate what is the lifetime tax savings in the modeled strategy. So if we decide to defer some income or bring it forward and do some Roth conversions, just smooth it down a little bit here, we can predict, okay, this can save, and especially when you do this early, this can save 6, if not 7 figures in taxes in your lifetime. So some of this planning, the really big planning opportunities are right at that retirement time period, that valley, and that's really crucial. I think sometimes when we think I should take money out of these accounts, that distribution or decumulation strategy of how and where you take money out of these accounts can be a game changer for your overall net worth. So this is really where heavy planning is really beneficial in your overall plan. All right, I'm done. I'm done with that stuff. So what I really want to think about is, so we get through all that, right? So we figure out, okay, we know the spending plan, we know the budget, we know what we want, maybe what we want our life to look like, but we get to the end of that meeting and people don't just go down to their HR office and put in their notice, right? I've had that happen one time. It was very exciting. The next day after a meeting, somebody said, okay, I'm convinced, right? I'm going to go retire. Not very often that happens, right? So we need that time for that news to kind of settle in. I just had a meeting this week with a client on Monday where they just said, can you show me those fancy numbers again where things like look really good? Because it's just kind of still like dancing around or thinking around like what retirement might look like. And they wanted that kind of confidence that, okay, I know you told me the numbers look okay, but I want to see it again. And then we get here. So that same person from Monday, Ashley, I'm going to send them to you because they're still not, they didn't go talk to their HR yet, right? They're their leader at work or whatever it is. So what's happening? So what people are getting the math and they're not retiring.
So I think for a vast majority of people, the math, the numbers like might be enough. Like that knowable, like that education, like that might be enough to help them um make the decision to get over the hump. And it makes sense. Like the math part is knowable, right? You can model it, you can project it, you can stress test it. Like it's knowable, right? And to a degree, right? I know external circumstances, situations can maybe change that, but for the most part, like that's knowable. Where things get really tricky, like the thing that makes people say like, well, I'll just work one more year. Like I'll just wait until this happens. Is generally it's not the can I afford to retire? Do the numbers look good where I can retire? It's usually some version of the question of what am I actually retiring into, which you kind of alluded to earlier. And that's a pretty loaded question of what am I retiring into? And I say that it's loaded because it's what's wrapped up in there are things like identity, grief. You get like what's called like the reverse Sunday scaries. I don't know if people have heard about like the Sunday scaries where Sunday night comes on and all of a sudden like you feel panicked because you're going like into your work week. This is actually like the reverse, you know, of that. One of the I had a client one time tell me that the hardest question for them in retirement, they were, an early retiree. The hardest question that they had was answering, "What do you do?" And it makes sense because for many people, you spend decades like in a profession or with an identity. Maybe it's not working in the sense of like career and earning income. Maybe it's raising kids. I've had plenty of like stay-at-home moms who are caretakers, and the kids go off, and it's like, well, what do you do? It's like, I guess I'm retired. I don't know. Like, how do I answer that? And there's a lot of benefits to work. It provides structure, status, social context, contacts, a reason to get up, like meaning, purpose. And so when we start to think about retirement, whether we're conscious of it or not, like our brain starts to kind of go into that like panic mode that like, oh crap, like I might lose all of this. And what am I going to be doing? What will I be retiring into? And especially if it's earlier than their peers or earlier than their parents. You talked about having like a model, like a retirement role model, like that. It creates a lot of just confusion, like from a brain standpoint, and our brains don't like confusion. It likes certainty. And so if it's like, I don't know what I'm retiring into, I don't have that part figured out. I hear Emily and Rich, and Cheney, like I hear the Archer team tell me that these numbers look good. I don't know what I'm retiring into. So well, I'll just work one more year. I'll do that. Again, it may not be entirely conscious, but it is very loaded and it does live there in the space that helps determine whether we make that leap and going to HR, as you said.
Hmm. Yeah, well, and I think too, like I think I get sometimes people saying, "Well, I don't want to disappoint my team or my coworkers, or my clients, or however they're serving." And so sometimes it's feeling like this obligation to be that hard worker and continue on.
Yeah. And so uh, when we look at or when we talk about identity, it's more than just who, like what do I do, but it's also kind of as you're like, who am I?
Hmm.
Like who am I as a person? Like a lot of us wrap answer that question or wrap our own identity up in like what we do. So for myself, for example, when I started pivoting into financial services, um, I I did not anticipate. I struggled with because I am a therapist and I did not recognize how much of my own identity was tied into being a therapist and then starting to transition into financial services where I'm no longer practicing clinically. It was, well, who am I? I don't know how to answer that question because I don't really know. And some people, especially for those who are maybe they're business owners, that's a big part of who they are. Or if they're executives, they're those our identity and who we are gets wrapped up into that. Or I'm the breadwinner. I am, the sole provider. Like there's just so much there around how we define who we are that can be tied to work or earning income that sometimes we don't realize until we are faced with the option, the decision, or to, leave that, or thinking about leaving that, or reducing that, or changing that in some way. And it can stir up a lot. And I think where it can manifest behaviorally is avoidance. Like, well, I'll just keep working. I'll just keep doing. I know I'm like 57 and like I really want to, I can. It would be good for me to be good for, my relationship. I would be able to be with our, kids more, our adult kids more. I'll just wait till I'm 60. 3 more years isn't long enough. I can hang in there. So it is important, I think, from a if we're when I'm working like with clients, like I think first to identify like what is this identity piece and how much of it is like contributing to that. Like what is there? And once we can name those things, sometimes naming it is like, oh, okay, like I struggle. I'll use myself. Like I struggle with, how do I answer who I am? Like, am I a therapist? Yes, like if I can just name that that's a struggle or has been a struggle, then it helps me to figure out, well, how do I want to answer that? Like, what's
Oh,
the answer that like I want to give? So if it's I'm a corporate executive, that's part of who I am. That's what I do.
mhm.
And if it's like, oh, I'm going to need to redefine that, or that piece is going to change, then we can start to rework just kind of that definition. And where we start to rework that is then in let's not define it by titles, because titles can change. Like, let's define like identity from characteristics. I am a, lover of learning. I enjoy, I am someone who enjoys like creative pursuits. I am a responsible person. Like if we can start to just reshape some of that identity and move away from titles, psychologically, like it just helps us navigate that space just a bit differently.
Mhm. Yeah, is there any exercise around that, or is it just kind of talking through, thinking through? How do you actually do that with somebody?
Yeah, so how I like to do it is by, talking through it just kind of just as we just did.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I'm sure there's great worksheets and like books and stuff like out there that are fantastic. I work how I work is working through it from a conversational processing piece. And just naming that and sitting with it, figuring out how does this feel? Let's try it on, kind of as you said, like with the spending, like let's just do an experiment. Why don't, as you're going out, yeah, you might still be working right now. But like, hey, like the next several like events you go to, like if someone says, like, what do you do? Like, why don't you try answering it this way? Try that definition on, see how that feels. It's probably going to be strange. It's probably going to be a little weird. It's not going to feel comfortable, but like start to try that on and practice with it. And then we can refine it from there. Okay, so we talked a little bit about like identity here, and that's a big, big component. But the other piece that I want to mention is, going back to that question of what am I actually retiring into, is we need a plan. And you, Emily, are fantastic on the number side. I am not. I'm not your girl for that. I'm not going to talk about numbers, but I am going to talk about what I call ideal life mapping. And so when we look at ideal life mapping, what I mean by that is, can we start to think about and look at what will your days, your weeks, your months, these years look like? And for a period of time. I like to break things down into smaller chunks. So for anyone who's been on this call, you've probably heard me say, if we've had a conversation, like, let's just look at it from like maybe the next 3 to 5 years. Let's take it in these windows or smaller chunks. Let's not think about retirement as like the next 30, years. Like that's a long time. There's a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty. It's hard to view ourselves in that future state. So let's just look at the next 5 years. What do you want your weeks to look like and feel like? What kind of structure do you want to put in place? So I actually have a worksheet, and for this, and we talk about, okay, what are some of the anchors you might want to put in that week or in that month? It might be going to the gym, it might be volunteering, or maybe you have a board or committee that you sit on,
Mhm.
or do some work for. Like, can we put some anchors there to help offer some structure? Let's fill in kind of that painting. I think about it as like a sketch, and if we can start to fill it in like a little bit,
Mhm.
there, all of a sudden the picture becomes a little bit more clear, and our brain grabs onto that, and it's like, oh, okay, so I know what this looks like a little bit more. Now it's easier for me to make that leap, take that jump, and say, Okay, yes, I'm actually willing to consider and look at retiring early because part of one of my anchors is actually going to be working part time, like 2 to 3 days a week. And that's going to be between, possibly maybe these hours and these hours. But okay, so then what the other days look like? Maybe I will go and visit the kids on Monday or go have lunch, with my spouse or who knows, right? The sky's the limit there. But if we can fill in that sketch a little bit more with this ideal life like mapping, it just helps to settle any of the anxiety or uncertainty that we may have.
Yeah, I love that. And I love thinking through some of those things too. And we put these goal tiles in the financial plan. So even though like sure, it's probably already covered in just whatever your normal miscellaneous spending is, but I like to actually put it in a tile with a name. And as many people know, I love to put the little emoji in there, some picture that goes with it. So it and sometimes it's even just having a tile that says like open budget to just explore hobbies or to devote into the exploration of what that could all look like. And sometimes I think it's just nice to see that out there to say, okay, this is what's going to go into whatever it is. Like I'm going to go take mahjong classes or some type of hobby that I might want to pick up or how I might want to spend my time. That's just sometimes nice to visualize that a little bit that way. And that's in the plan where we'll do that.
Yeah. I think one of the things here, I love that you guys do that. Um, I feel like Clayton and I should hire you as our advisors because I just want those visuals, like, so I could do that. Um, so I guess one of the things that I want to mention with these buckets, like these visuals here, is to think about like what are things that are fulfilling for you. I find that pre-retirees, when we're in that pre-retiree kind of stage and we're thinking about retiring, they tend to focus on like, what will I do with my time and how will I fill it from a activity place or a task, type of place. And that's not bad. Like that's not wrong. But I was just on a call actually literally right before I jumped on here and the husband was saying that he's retired before the wife. She wants to work a few more years for some reasons, and he is having a hard time right now in that he's filling up his days with things to do, but like they're not meaningful, and he feels like he's just kind of like going through the motions and he's not connected to what they do. And so when we're looking at this, ideal week, month, life, like mapping, when we're looking at these buckets, it is so important to think about what are the things that bring me like not just joy, but where I derive meaning from. Like where do I feel like I'm getting like fulfillment and meaning from? And if we can focus on those things instead of hobbies, then that will serve as like a guide, really. I think about out in the ocean, kind of like it will just oh my gosh, the word literally just went out my brain. The lighthouse there. So embarrassing. North Carolina girl, like for the beach, all the lighthouses. I can't believe I forgot that. But it'll serve if we can focus on the things that give us meaning, like those really kind of are like that, like, that lighthouse there that tell us, like, hey, where do we go? I give the example of I get a lot of joy and meaning out of gardening.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, I cannot dedicate the time that I would love to. However, I already know that when that time comes where I do have more white space in my calendar, I will focus on doing that. And what that looks like is because I know gardening gives me joy, it gives me a lot of meaning. I'll probably be researching like how to experiment with growing certain plants. I'll spend some of my time definitely at the garden store. Who knows? I might even decide to work there part time because I enjoy it. I'd like to pursue becoming a master gardener because that is how I take this thing that gives me meaning and joy. And that's then how I start to work and create how will I fill my days and my time if I follow that. Now, you can have more than one, right? So I'm just giving that as an example for if we focus on something or things that give us meaning. Um, a caveat kind of to that, it is okay if things change, if that changes. Oftentimes, and this is for women, I hear a lot of women say, I'm going to retire and then I'm going to take care of my grandkids. And there's nothing wrong with that. That sounds fabulous. I've worked with a mom where that changed, a grandma where that changed. She thought that that would bring her so much joy. And not that it didn't, but she did not want to commit to the level of caretaking that she was. And it was, oh my gosh, I don't want to be full-time grandma. Like, I think I just kind of want to be weekend, like part-time grandma. And I want to spend my days doing other things. So keeping in mind that the thing that we think we may want to do, you mentioned earlier around permission to change. It's okay if we have permission to change, like, and it might, which is all the more reason why I say let's focus on just a small chunk of time when we're designing and looking and answering this question of what am I going to retire into?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I love Brene Brown talks about like this exercise that she did with her family when they were trying to figure out some of these activities to do and how to travel together. And one perspective that I really liked that she shared with her kids or with her family was thinking about the activities where you lose track of time as a way to kind of measure those things that are really like engaging and immersive. And so I think of that as something where, what are those things that you really just like you with gardening, probably if you didn't really have somewhere you had to be, it's just something that you want to hyper focus on and, just where you want to kind of immerse your brain because, there's still personal growth. So just because you are done working doesn't mean you're done learning or growing your brain. You're going to stretch it in these different ways. And I've always loved a wheel of life exercise. And so for those of you on the call who haven't done that with me or with us or separately before, it's really just thinking about the one that I use is these different dimensions of wellness. And it's a wheel basically that has these different dimensions of wellness on it and you score how you feel about this particular dimension or area of your life. And is there a gap? Is it different than where you want it to be? And so sometimes when I have people, we'll have these meetings where people say, well, I don't want to die with $20 million in my account. Like, I guess I need to start spending it, but I don't even know what I want to do with my time or my money and or how I want to fill my time or whatever it might be. And so giving those categories can sometimes be useful. And so those major categories can be health related. So how do I feel about my health right now and where would I like it to be? And how can I put some time, attention, or money towards that area? And personal growth is one of those. So, and that can be a lot of different things. That's not career advancement. That can be learning about becoming a master gardener or keeping a certain plant alive, whatever it might be. So, moving from the survival of the fittest type gardening to like, I'm actually going to intentionally try to make this happen. What does personal growth mean to me? I love, Ashley sent me a book once, and we've sent this to many of our clients. What will I do all day? And one of the examples in there was a man who I think on his 90th birthday, he wanted to go spend a day at Harvard and see what the smart people were doing over there. And his sweet, like little old wife set up a day for him to sit in Harvard and classes and just see what that was all about. And so I think sometimes learning some of those stories can inspire my own plan. I'm inspired constantly by clients. So I'll come off of a meeting and hear about something somebody's doing. It's, oh, I got to go add that to my plan, whether it's a travel destination or a hobby or a way of thinking. So I'm constantly taking in what everybody is sharing with me as well and learning and absorbing and regurgitating that to other clients and whatever it might be. And so those areas about, what do I love the way my home is? Do I want to make some changes? Do I want to move? Do I want to live in a different state? Do I want to upsize, downsize? Do I want to renovate? So it's your home, your health, your relationships, your personal growth. There's all of these different areas. So that's another offer to you as well. I'm always happy to send that exercise if you'd like to just see, what are some of those more specific categories? Because sometimes people don't work well with blank space. So sometimes I think that sometimes retirement feels like this like whiteboard blank space of how am I going to
Mm.
fill this time?
Yeah.
And Ashley, you're really good at having worksheets and ways to sometimes think through this a little bit. We do this a little bit too in some of those categories, but it's just thinking about sometimes from a category perspective, and you don't have to have something there. Not everybody wants to volunteer their time or be philanthropic, but sometimes just seeing this list and like choosing from a menu sometimes can feel a little bit better and just try things out and kind of see how it all lands and how it resonates and how it feels.
Yeah. I think the people who are, I know we're coming up on time, and so I want to be mindful of that. What I'd like to maybe just kind of share here is that the people who feel best about early retirement are the ones who don't wait until like the last day to start thinking about and working on this. They've been thinking about this plan, and there's really two tracks here, and that we're talking about. There's the financial prep
Mhm.
of what will this look like? What do I need to do from a number standpoint, from a readiness? But then there's also a life prep. And so these are, there are two tracks here that are running parallel. And so it's really easy, I think, for people to start thinking about the financial like piece because again, that's knowable. If we can take a little bit of time and run down that track of like the life prep, try some things on, do some experiments, like you've said, like we've talked about before you actually pull, the trigger, whether it's to go part-time or, not working at all, like try some things out, and figure it out before you get there.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think that the final thing I'll think about is I said I had a client who was really struggling with this. And I told him before our next meeting, like, can you just make yourself like a little list of things that you want to do? Early retirement, what that might look like. So he came to the list and he said, okay, did my homework, got my list. He starts reading it off. And it's all projects. Like it's all it needed to get done. I'm like, okay, two lists. We need two lists. The have to do, like these are the deferred things that you haven't done. And then what about the want to do? Who do you want to go have lunch with? Who do you
Yeah.
want to spend more time with? What do you want to do more? You want to go to the library in the middle of the day? Like, what do you want to do? So all of those things, I think that it's just starting to think about it early and let me know. If you're on this call and you feel like maybe Emily doesn't know I'm thinking about retiring earlier than I might think because, we conversationally, we bring this up, we think regularly, or we I hope provide the opportunity for you to share that with us. But if that's something that's on your mind, I always like to come up with that minimum viable product of that earliest retirement possible. And how do we make that happen? If we need to be creative or we need to think through this a little bit differently, or if you worry about some of our clients are worried about layoff possibility of what if this is out of my hands? Those different types of scenarios, I'm happy to run that early scenario for you. So that's my offer coming out of this meeting is please feel free to share with me if there's anything here that you want to learn more about or anything resonated with you. If you'd like to book some time with Ashley, I'm happy to coordinate that or have her join a meeting with me. So she is a resource that's available to this firm, and I'm absolutely so grateful to have this resource available because ultimately I will come to Ashley and say, help me become better and help me have these conversations in a way that is most effective for my clients because it is so important to understand how everything comes together. And it can't just be the math. We know the emotional aspect is important. And Ashley's just absolute expert and a dear friend and just a wonderful resource for our clients. So thank you for spending the time with us today. I hope this was useful for you. And then I think there was Ashley, there's one worksheet that we were going to give as a follow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
So we've got a worksheet that we'll be sending over to you. You'll also get the recording. You'll get the slide deck from today. So thanks again. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.